Starting Point Coaching and Consulting presents Kairos Conversations, Connecting with Quality, the podcast. Kairos is Greek for the right time, the right season, the right opportunity. This podcast features healthcare quality professionals who share their journeys, their advice, their struggles, how they made that transition into a new and exciting role. My heart's desire is that you find this podcast to be inspirational to you as you make your own journey. Don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues and friends and rate us on whichever podcast platform you listen to. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I am joined by my next guest, John Lee. Thank you so much for being here, John.
Oh, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
I'm super excited to talk to you today because I am so impressed and inspired by your journey. And I want the audience to hear all of the ways that you navigated your non-traditional path. So let's start by introducing yourself to the audience.
Absolutely. So my name's John, and I'm a physical therapist by training. And currently I am the co-founder of Pickle. Pickle is a job matching platform for clinicians to match with health tech, clinical and non-clinical careers using our AI. And I came about this with my team after several years, both in clinical practice and across big pharma, consulting, and startups. So we just wanted to make the process a little bit easier for our clinical community.
I absolutely love that because that is such a gap in our community. But let's go back a little bit and talk about how you decided physical therapy in the first place.
I think this is a great question. And I think most people enter physical therapy or occupational therapy or medicine or nursing in much the same way. They were inspired by someone, they had a mentor when they were younger who pushed them into a path that they didn't really know before. And so for me, I believe that little boys are not generally as smart as little girls, because I remember being 4 or 5 years old and wanting to be a fire truck or a dinosaur. But for me, my path into physical therapy started as a teenager where, like many other boys, I was in sports and I got injured. And I had a really great experience with a local PT who not only rehabbed me, but gave me a job and showed me the ropes and helped us work in this community health setting for the people in our community that we were trying to help. And I really loved that experience.
And so at that point, you were young and you said, I had this great experience and I want to do PT. What did it look like for you after that? Where did you go to school, or what part of the country?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Virginia, but I spent a lot of time in New York City as a kid as well. And so I took the typical sports path by going to the University of Virginia, where I was a student athletic trainer. And then I did my PT training at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I was really lucky to work with their sports medicine team and their college basketball team. This was during the Shaka Smart Final Four days. So that was a dream come true as a young guy who wanted to be a sports PT. And then when I graduated, I went into my orthopedic residency, and I did a sports and orthopedic manual therapy fellowship in Houston, Texas.
Okay. And did you do the traditional, was it the DPT at that time, or was it a master's at that time?
I went to the DPT route. Yep. So I did 4 years at UVA as an athletic trainer, 3 years at VCU as a DPT, and then my 1 year residency, and then 2 year dual fellowship.
Okay. And when you graduated with your and did your fellowship and all of that, did you work in sports medicine or sports PT at that time, or did you take a different route?
Absolutely. So when I finished my fellowship in 2016, I was looking for a way to get into this pro sports sphere. As a young PT, that was the goal. That was the dream. And so I started reading about different state practice patterns and where athletes hung out. And I found something really interesting. At the time, in the mid 2010s, Oregon had full direct access and reimbursement for their physical therapy services. In addition, really interestingly, if you're into sports, you know that Nike HQ is in Beaverton, which is a suburb of Portland. And so I put the pieces together and realized that Oregon might be a way for me to, one, network and meet athletes, but also a way to treat professional athletes without having to go the traditional team route, which would be another 10 years of climbing. So I found the biggest sports facility in the Northwest, and they were located near Nike. I applied there, I got in, and I mean, it was a dream come true. We had like a 30,000 square foot facility. We had AstroTurf. We had a pool. We had an indoor track. We had all the kettlebells and weights and whistles and like all the things that you could really dream of. And when I got there, I started networking with agents and college athletes and professional athletes and started treating NFL players and Major League Baseball players, as well as the college athletes and weekend warriors. And, it was the culmination of a dream come true. Like I got to work with these people I saw on TV with all the cool toys and was able to blend this training I got from not only athletic training, but doing that sports and manual therapy fellowship, as well as my residency training in a really, really exciting environment.
So that sounds like a dream job. How long did you stay there?
I was there for about 3 years. So it was a really interesting time. Like I loved what I did, but I had a situation which I think most clinicians can relate to because you only really know this if you've been in patient care. And so I was working at this facility, loved it. But we also treated normal human beings as well, and specifically one of my colleagues, her name is Caitlin. She's an amazing therapist in Portland. She was going on holiday and she asked me to pick up one of her patients while she was on holiday. I was like, sure. Yeah, of course. Like we're teammates. I'm happy to help you. Her patient was a 90-year-old grandfather who wanted to pick up his great grandchild,
Oh, sweet.
And so you think about this, and this is kind of like the root of our profession is helping people who really need it for functional improvement, right?
Uh-huh.
So I spent the next week or two while she was on holiday teaching this fellow how to do a sumo deadlift using weights. We did it very light. We started on risers, just working on that hinge motion. And he was able to pick up his great grandchild. And he actually sent me a picture of it. And this really stuck with me. I had spent at this point, I think 9 years of schooling, training, whatever you want to call it, trying to climb this mountain of pro sports. And I was treating athletes, pro, college, whatever. But were these the people that really needed it? Why did we take our white coat in the first place? I'm sitting here, working with this old man, helping him pick up his great grandkids. And I realized that I had lost or forgotten the reason why I got into healthcare in the first place, not just sports therapy. And what happened was when I was a very young kid, my parents are immigrants. We grew up in a really rural place. My dad had a really bad injury. And I remember going to the hospital with him as a kid, it's maybe 3 or 4 years old, and thinking it was really strange that people spoke to him differently. They didn't treat him poorly or anything like that. But whether due to language or cultural differences or, all these other parts of social determinants of health, I realized as a young kid, he didn't get the care that everyone else I saw got. And after working with this old man, I realized that was actually the thing that pushed me into healthcare. I had forgotten it as on my tour as a young boy trying to get into sports and climbing the sports mountain.
That is so powerful. I'm just over here. My heart is just beating from this story. Oh my gosh. So you went the route of sports, not realizing that your true love was helping people to do the things that they love, like from a functional, day-to-day, practical perspective.
Exactly. It just happened that these athletes loved to do sports, but just like you said, much more eloquently than I did, it really went back to that white coat oath of helping people improve their functional capabilities and doing the things that matter with their friends, with their families, with their children, with their jobs, doing these things that matter were one of the biggest attractions of being a physical therapist. Because I think when people come to you as patients, they're not really coming to us as injuries, right? They're coming to us out of fear.
Right.
My shoulder hurts. But I'm not here because my shoulder hurts. I'm here because will I be able to work? Will I be able to play sports again? Will I be able to make a livelihood? Will I be able to pick my children up? Because I might be the only breadwinner in the home and I've got three children. And if I can't work, they don't eat. It's this fear that really drives patients, I think, to come to us especially in the American medical system where healthcare is so expensive. And we see injuries very, very late when they've snowballed. And so, yeah, going back to this functional capability and helping people improve functionally, I think that really is the core of why healthcare or clinicians in general really are so mission driven in what we do.
So was that the defining point for you? Is that when you said, okay, I'm going to switch gears and go into another setting?
So this is really fascinating because the short answer is it's one of them. I found that the most traumatic things in my life happened when I think I know it all. You can call this the challenge of hubris or ego, right? Because I'm 25, 26 years old at this point, working in sports, and I think I haven't made it. And something comes out of left field that makes you question what you're doing and what your why is, right? As Simon Sinek would say. And so that was maybe my first pivot, I guess, if you want to call that. And what happened after that was I did the millennial thing and I quit my job and I went backpacking through Australia and Southeast Asia for about 5 or 6 weeks. And went to these like rural towns in Malaysia and these beach towns in Australia and just kind of understand, like, I had spent so much time focused on this one singular goal of pro sports, like what was next. Then I realized that I had kind of been tunnel visioning in my career by going to this depth expertise of sports, that the things that are happening around me in my community, I was kind of not fully aware of. Specifically in Portland, it was the homeless crisis and the opioid crisis. It was ravaging the West Coast and most of the US at this time. And so I was actually on a hike in Australia and I got a call from my sister who just gave birth to her first child, the first baby in our generation, coming from an immigrant family. And then I realized that, the people that needed help the most were the people who were part of our communities and part of our families, our tribes, so to speak. So I went back to Portland and I decided to go into community outpatient physical therapy with a safety net hospital. This was Providence, St. Joseph at the time. And I actually started working in things like women's health. I would work in like sexual assault, breast cancer, and ovarian cancer. I would work in autoimmune diseases. I would work with homeless patients and drug addicts and like people who would panhandle for bus fare, right? And I absolutely loved it. I was able to not only treat patients who needed it, but I had taken on my residency and fellowship training and actually started a mini residency program or mentorship program at the hospital so that all of our younger therapists were doing pro sports care on people who had few to no resources. And the outcomes were really amazing. I thought that was a really, really cool next 2 or 3 years or phase of my life.
So what did you learn about the healthcare system at that time? I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the worst of the worst and some of the best in terms of how healthcare has been delivered.
Let me tell you a story that really changed my life. I remember I was treating this Hispanic lady for shoulder pain, and she was just crying. Like, she couldn't lift her arm up. She was a temp at Nike. Doctors wanted her to have surgery. She didn't have the resources. She didn't know what's going on. And I sat there and she had gone through several clinicians, therapists, doctors, etc., and just talked to her for a little bit. And I found out something really amazing. I found out, one, that her neck pain was actually neurologic and it was stress induced. And the reason why was her son had just got deported by ICE. And if you think about
Wow.
that is a very complex case, right? But what can
Right.
we do as clinicians? And so I actually spent the next 20 or 30 minutes, this was right before lunch, and just started setting up and finding pro bono legal resources for her and her family, right? Came back 2 weeks later, didn't give her any exercises or anything like that. But she'd be able to talk to the lawyer, and her radiculopathy had centralized from her fingertips all the way up to above her elbow. So if you understand, radiculopathy, the smaller the area of paresthesia, usually symptoms are improving. I think
Mm-hmm.
this was like a big of just an encapsulation of like what I was doing at that time and why I really enjoyed working in that setting because people actually needed it, and you had to use your brain, right? It wasn't just like external rotation or lower trap strengthening. The people with fewer resources had so many comorbidities and so many different strings of life that were impacting them that putting them together and listening to them for someone who has taken months for them to get an appointment or has been down a dead end was really, really enriching.
Yeah, I love the fact that you were actually able to get to that level of depth in her story, right? Because you didn't just take her through this path and I'm just going to evaluate your neck and your shoulder. You actually listened to the root of what her issue was. And then when that stress started to resolve, when she started to have answers, then her symptoms did also.
Yeah. And I think this is why physical therapy in general, I'm biased. I'm a physical therapist, but we have such a gift where we're allowed to see a patient, if we're lucky, 2 to 3 times a week for half an hour or more, right? Whereas the typical doctor's visit, which is super important, is a couple of minutes, a couple times a year, right? And we have this opportunity to dig deeply and really, really get to the root of the problem and then relay that information back to the rest of the medical team, right? And I really think that physical therapists and occupational therapists and these kind of allied health professionals are really, really important glue components for these patient-centered care models.
And so, how can we use that to make our healthcare system better? Because as we both know, there are lots of challenges in our US healthcare system. And some of them seem so big that it's like, where do we even start?
I can think of one example immediately. This is super fascinating. So I can't remember if it was the Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic, but around the same time that I was working in this community outpatient setting, they ran this trial program where they started allocating resources for patient care in a very small area
Mm-hmm.
based on dollars per minute, right? And what they were able to find was, okay, a nurse is maybe $2 per minute, allied health is $1.50 per minute, a surgeon's like $37 per minute. And they took this data and they started experimenting with other care models. And so what that means is if you think about your traditional care model in a private clinic, for example, you would have your intake done by the front desk, and you would have the physician do the diagnosis and treatment, then you would have the medical assistant do the notes, then you would have physician come back and do the prescriptions. And it's like it's very it's a bit inefficient, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what they did was they started reorienting the sequence of care within an actual visit. For example, you would do your nurse intake first for your medications. And then for a musculoskeletal patient, then you would have the physical therapist go in. And then you would just have the surgeon come in at the very end to double check and write the prescriptions. And what they were able to find was that not only did their cost of care go down, but their quality outcomes went way, way up because you were able to ask those specific questions from the person with a deep subject matter expertise in a way that allowed everything to be more time efficient. Because, for example, physical therapists are expert in musculoskeletal care, right? We do this for years, whereas a typical medical training might have a 12-week rotation in musculoskeletal, unless they're an orthopedic surgeon or a sports medicine doctor or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have nurses who are deeply, deeply educated in polypharmacy and drug interactions and things like that. And this is just kind of a really unique way to answer your question about how new care models can be created and actually show impact not only financially, but on outcomes.
So basically, you're deferring to expertise, which is one of the tenets of high reliability. It's having the person or the discipline of people that know the thing to do the thing.
Absolutely. And then you could further extrapolate this model by using a hub and spoke model. And what that means is, let's say you have one hub and spoke that's just cardiovascular care. Well, in this cardiovascular care hub and spoke, you only hire cardiac physical therapists. You only hire cardiologists. You only hire cardiac care nurses. And you funnel all your cardiac patients to this hub and spoke of your organization. You could do the same thing for neurology, for orthopedics and musculoskeletal. And you can kind of see how having these different hubs of subspecialists along with unique care models all around a central organizational umbrella. If you put this in an area with high unmet need, you can make patient care really, really efficient. And this is even before you get into the rise of all these AI tools and note takers and optimization tools, right? These are more design challenge problems for people.
Right. I love that. So at the beginning, you talked about, a job board that you have worked on and are launching. How did you go from sports PT to, working with underserved communities in a community setting to tech?
So this is the pivot number two, where I mentioned before, where the craziest things in life happen when you think you've got it figured out.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was COVID. That first wave period across healthcare was just insane. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
crazy for patients, but I think for clinicians on a fundamental level, we didn't even know what we were bringing home to our families. We didn't have personal equipment. We didn't have protective equipment. I mean, I was working with a lot of cancer patients at the time. So like people are going through chemo, like, they're immunocompromised. And this was just a really, really unique time in healthcare's history. At the end of the first wave, it's April or May 2020. I came home from work, you know, crazy mask lines on my face, hands dry from all the hand sanitizer, etc. And I turned the news on and I saw a ticker on CNN that said AstraZeneca is developing the first COVID vaccine in partnership with the University of Oxford. I don't know why, but like a light bulb just went off in my head. And I realized that, my colleagues and we could see 100 patients a day. But in the city of a million people like Portland, how could we do more?
Mm-hmm.
Magnified by the impact of a global pandemic. And I realized that patient care is incredibly noble, but it's challenging to scale because of the amount of time we spend with patients. And in the current scenario where you have millions of people around the world getting infected and dying with this black swan event, how could we do more? So I called Oxford at 4 in the morning or something the next morning. And I talked to admissions and I said, "Hey, I'm coming to your school." There
Just like
and
that.
stuff like that. And British people have a different personality than Americans. They're a bit more dry. Uh, they're a bit more reserved. I remember the lady who was speaking at Oxford saying three things. She said, "Number one, who are you? Number two, we've never accepted a physio into the university before." I remember she said physio very clearly. And the third thing she said was, "That's not how admissions work in this country." And so, long story short, the only degree they had left after the first wave was business school. And I had never really thought about business school before. But, if you think back to our profession, physical therapy in particular, there's usually two ways up, you're told, right? You can get up through being a clinical manager or director, or you can get up through your PhD and be a professor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had my GRE I'd taken every 5 years for that inevitable time when I was going to take my PhD in biomechanics or something like that. And so I used that to apply to business school in about a week. And that was,
Wow.
that was, that was wild. But the craziest part was I wrote about us. I wrote about what it was like to be a clinician in America during the first wave, to be expected to treat patients, especially in the community health setting, every 15 minutes or less, to see things, unspeakable things, whether they're from infection or immigration or cancer or sexual assault, and then to be expected to compartmentalize this and do it over and over again from people pushing productivity who had never had to watch somebody die.
Right.
And yeah, I got in. But what's crazy is I got my acceptance and like very late in the summer, and I actually didn't end up leaving Portland. I didn't end up quitting my job until August 1st. And I left Portland August 9th. It took me about 3 weeks to drive to Virginia to drop my dog off at my mom's house. I remember applying for an expedited visa in Utah as I was driving through like the desert. Um, and I left the 26th. I started school. I entered the UK 27th. I started school September 1st. And then the country went into lockdown. So had never opened PowerPoint, never opened Excel, went to a foreign country, sold my house, and then you're stuck there without like any of your friends and family in a foreign
And you
country.
can't get out because it's on lockdown.
Exactly. Um, so yeah, that was an interesting time. But to answer your question of how I got into tech, Oxford had like several $billion in funding from big pharma and other organizations to like develop this COVID vaccine. And what's interesting is at the time, Oxford was the best university in the world. They're the best medical school in the world. And when you have that much money and that much mental horsepower, even if you're not working in drug development, there are sprinklings of innovation all across the ecosystem. So I just wanted to be at Oxford during this like shift in resources and this shift in priority. So I started working for a bunch of startups and professors. I was a founder's associate at this really cool health tech startup called RegMetrics. Basically, their founder found a way to automate medical device regulatory prediction rules. And so what this means is if we're trying to make more ventilators for people and you spend a year and $10 million building this ventilator and it doesn't pass regulatory approval, then you just wasted a year and $10 million, right? So they
Mm-hmm.
found a way to predict that where inventors could put their idea in before they built it and know exactly what pathway to follow to, in this case, make more ventilators more quickly. So that was really interesting. And then I was a like venture consultant slash, this is a fancy word for an intern at this really cool medtech startup in Germany, which had developed a micro MRI. This MRI is going to be able to fit on a cart, like a push cart at the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and with a 3-prong outlet. So you could like wheel this thing into like West Virginia or India or, various other places. And it was 1/1000th the cost of other MRIs. So that, as a musculoskeletal expert, that was really fascinating, both on the PT side and also on the community health side. And then where I got my big break was I got an internship with the chief medical officer of Bayer Pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right around the time or right after they had bought Monsanto. And what's really interesting is the chief medical officer put me on the digital transformation team. And basically, they had an influx of new priorities. They had an influx of like existing programs. And they were just trying to figure out, okay, how do we prioritize what programs we're building and what tools we're making? And what is the plan for this? And quite honestly, his name is Mike DeVoy, Chief Medical Officer. I worked with him and his Chief of Staff named Stephanie Camerath, and they were so good to me. They literally gave me the keys to the castle. And what that means
Wow.
is they said, yeah, go talk to whoever you want. Like, look at all these different programs and just give us a plan at the end of the summer. So with the blessing of the chief medical officer, I got to dive into like all this crazy tech I had never even thought of before 10 months after leaving clinic, right? Things like genomic digital twins and high throughput drug discovery models, right? And like virtual reality support systems, right? And build these different products into like a cohesive program and recommendation for senior leadership. And so yeah, that was really interesting because I saw a lot of tech in that role. But when I graduated in 2021, Oxford's just a 1-year MBA. We were still in the pandemic, so I decided I wanted to go work in drug development. And I decided to go into management consulting. I found a really great small consulting firm in London called Idea Pharma, and they do something really cool. Big pharma comes to them with their early stage tech and molecules, right? Drugs or software or whatever. And they have an inkling of what they can do with it. But Idea Pharma has to figure out the specifics, like what diseases can we explore? Who are the combination partners? What patients could this go to? How do you build all the clinical trials? How do you build market access and pricing? How do you pass regulatory compliance for a company that's going to enter Asia and the US and Europe in what sequence? And so I spent the next few years with them working on these crazy space age cures that most of them are coming out at the end of the decade. Things like CAR T and like vaccines and oncolytic viruses and these things that could scale to billions of people.
So what I love about your journey is that you did not let anything stand in your way. So you said, okay, they're doing great things in England or in the UK, so I'm going to go there. If I need to go to Portland, I'm going to go to Portland. If I need to change path, you weren't afraid to change paths no matter what that looked like.
So I think you're very kind. I realize now as a little bit older man that I am more risk seeking than your typical clinical profile and everything but clinical treatment. And I bring that up because at every step of the way, I was just trying to find ways, do things that I thought were right? Not even necessarily for my career. Like the pro sports thing was cool, but the community health and then business school and going overseas and going to drug development, I just was trying to find a way to get to people who I thought needed it. And quite honestly, it should have blown up in my face, but I really need to give credit to all the people around me. Like at every step of the way, I've just been able to find people and ask for help and guidance and learn from them, right? And these people around me, this like tribe, I think are so important to anyone's growth. Because quite honestly, it looks so smooth, the journey when you talk about it in retrospect, really through the middle of it. I probably did not take the best or smartest or most rational choice, especially post COVID. I was just trying to find a way to how do we impact more lives after seeing what I saw during the first wave as a clinician.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Well, I love it. I know, like you said, when you look back in retrospect, it's like it looks like it was a smooth line. But when you're going through it, it's nothing but smooth. There's all of these decisions. Am I making the right decision? Am I taking the right risk? Am I, you know, what is this going to mean for my career if I come back to the States? All of the things that may have been going through your mind at the time.
Exactly.
So I don't want to end this conversation without asking you, how did you go from that to developing this platform where clinicians can find different types of jobs?
Oh, this is a great question. So while I was in London, two things happened separate from when I was working in consulting and drug development that kind of blew my mind. The first thing that happened was I'd say over 1,000 clinicians reached out to me from around the world, and they all had the same story. There are huge problems in healthcare. I'm burnt out. I'm not being used to my full creativity. How can I do more to address the problems I'm seeing every day? What is my path? How did you do it? And on the other side, I had a bunch of accelerators and founders and investors reach out, I think because I had an Oxford MBA or whatever. And they would ask me like really simple clinical questions. Things like, why can't I hire doctors in Zimbabwe to scale my US telehealth app? Licensing, credentialing, practice patterns, right? Very simple things that any clinician would know. And I realized that 90% of founders in healthcare aren't clinicians, and 90% of clinicians aren't founders. But because healthcare is so regulated and so opaque in terms of its workflows, they actually need each other to have success. But the problem is not that they don't want each other. The problem is that they're on different channels, right? Because if you're a finance guy or a software engineer, you're not going to be in the hospital 50, 60 hours a week for 10 years. And if you're a clinician in the hospital 50, 60 hours a week for 10 years, you're not going to be going to hackathons or coding boot camps or like tech conventions, right? And so Pickle actually started out as a next degree. And the way we started it was we started a pub night in London on Reddit. And we would have clinicians, we would invite a few clinicians. I would invite all my founder and venture capital friends, and I would just put them at a table, right? And I would just see what happened and listen. And what was really fascinating was many of these clinicians then got jobs or advisory roles, et cetera, with these startups. But then many of these startups were then able to go raise or sell to the NHS, which is the UK's hospital system, very quickly. And so you had the situation where you had the people who understood healthcare, the people building amazing things in healthcare working together to go get their products and ideas adopted by actual patient care units. Around the same time, in August 2023, the World Health Organization said COVID was over. And so I made the decision to leave my job in drug development. I had a great experience there, but I had gone in knowing that I was doing this as a clinician because I wanted to impact more lives. Now that COVID was over, so to speak, I felt that it was time to come back to what I was really passionate about. And that was helping inspire and helping educate an entire new generation of clinicians. Because at the end of the day, healthcare is constrained by its labor supply. And what that means is the people doing the work of treating patients are the thing that make the entire engine go. And how can we do more for the clinicians, for the scientists who are impacting patient care directly, whether their goals are a clinical job, a non-clinical job, or something in the middle?
Right.
And so we started Pickle. We started as Next Degree at first, just to gather data and build out our prototype. And we were able to very quickly aggregate like several thousand jobs and several thousand signups from clinicians and test it and use it. But then what we found was, you mentioned that clinicians are able to find jobs. That's actually just part of it because, we never really learned how to look for jobs in medical training. Kind of told that if you think about anything but patient care, you're unethical and you'll learn it in the future, which I think is kind of crazy because you need to find out who a good employer is, right?
Exactly.
So having 2,000 health tech jobs in one place specifically for clinicians is kind of overwhelming. So now we're also building out other tools that, for example, when clinicians sign up and they give us very basic information about themselves, we can actually send you directly the top jobs for you every week. So you don't even have to search. And all we're trying to do is we're trying to cut out the gap between hospitals, startups, hiring managers, and clinicians and match them as quickly as they can so you can go back and build your thing and impact more patients in the way that you see fit. Because at the end of the day, there are so many problems in healthcare. If we don't have the opportunity to connect the people changing healthcare with the people who understand healthcare and its problems intimately, that slows down innovation.
Yeah, I love that you said that. And what intrigued me about what you just said is how you can match the job seeker, the clinician with the role that fits them based on their profile or based off of what the need is. And I find that so many of these other job boards send all these random things that don't match at all. Right. And you're like, okay, I put in this specific search terms and you're sending me something about some random other thing that has nothing to do with what I put in. So I like the fact that you've been able to create something that actually works.
I appreciate that. I will say that we built our prototype, but we'll be working on this for the next 10 years or so. And there's like two key challenges with this. The first one is quite simply healthcare is expanding beyond anything that we've ever anticipated. And what that means is there are roles like digital clinic manager and clinical product manager that didn't exist a year or two ago.
Right.
How do you map something with an existing system for a role that there's no other data to draw a conclusion from, right? So number one, healthcare is expanding really quickly into new verticals and new roles and responsibilities that didn't exist before, which leads to the second problem. Existing systems actually don't work because of this rapid expansion. And this is nothing bad. It's just when you're entering new territory, it's hard to predict where it's going if all of your models are based on previous data, right?
Right.
So we actually have to build everything from scratch. We're not like doing things like taking someone else's software and putting it in there, right? We actually have to build this matching out recommendation from scratch, which means that whether you're a nurse or a pharmacist or a physical therapist or a doctor or a surgeon, and if you want to go into sales or product or telehealth or clinical research, in order to match all those, we actually have to build it from scratch. So we've built our version 1. But again, as healthcare continues to expand, as more and more clinicians are looking to take that next step in their career, we'll be building this out for a long time. It's definitely not done.
Tell people how they can find you and how they can find this new app.
Absolutely. So you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn handle is John Lee PT, JONLEEPT. And then you can find us at withpickle.com or our previous URL, nextdegree.org. But yeah, our company, we're building a company for clinicians called Pickle. And our goal is pick your dream job in healthcare with pickle.com.
Awesome. So any parting words for the audience?
Absolutely. I can think back to the one thing that kind of drove my career and made my brain grow the most. And I think that point is networking. But I have a slightly different take on networking. I think it's really, really important to network with clinicians and your clinical community. But especially if you're looking to merge to a non-clinical career, it's really, really important to network with people who have no idea what healthcare is. People like software developers, people like product designers, people like accountants who are all in this startup space. Because what you'll find is we use a term in startups called spikes. What is your spike? My spike is in clinical workflows. My spike is in back-end engineering. Find someone and other people with a similar interest as you in terms of healthcare or health tech, but with a different spike. Because what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to exchange information and you'll be able to exchange networks. So really, as you're going through your networking processes and strategies, really, really make an effort to network with non-clinicians as well who share your similar interests in terms of industry and outcomes.
I love that because it's not just staying within the people that you know, your circle. You're expanding your reach and your opportunities when you're willing to have conversations with people who are outside of your industry and outside of your sphere of knowledge.
Absolutely. And if you're online, it's really simple. Literally just a LinkedIn invite, personalized one. Hey, I saw that you are also really interested in VR. I'm a clinician interested in VR. Can I learn from you? Would you be up for a chat? And secondly, if you're in a major metro area, either start a meetup or find an in-person meetup. Because I think one of the clinicians' biggest gifts is we're really personable because we treat patients all day, right? So making an effort to meet people face to face, I feel, goes a lot further than just doing digital only introductions.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here, John. Our conversation has been super inspiring, and I'm excited to see what you do next.
Absolutely. And I love what you're doing as well, especially with your work in the healthcare quality space. I think healthcare quality is a big area of improvement, especially as we move into a value-based care field. And thanks for advocating for not only PTs, but clinicians in general to be involved in bridging the gap.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. It would mean a lot if you would share this episode with a friend or a colleague. I would be honored to encourage them in their journey too.